how you started and how you come into the data field.
Was playing an online game instead of attending university classes, which was not great for my grades.
What is the biggest mistake that the companies are right now making?
I think probably the biggest mistake is jumping on too much technology.
What is one red flag? You notice that while you're doing the editing of any
I would say there's one red flag. Then there are a few tools that it's very easy to spend an enormous amount of money for no value.
Welcome to the Executive Outlook. In this edition, we have been joined by Chet, a data leader who spent decades solving the complex problems with clarity and logic. With a PhD in mathematical science and hands-on experience with infrastructure and the databases, Chet brings a rare mix of deep technical knowledge and real-world wisdom. Welcome, Chet.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start it from the starting, how you started and how you come into the data.
So I was playing an online game instead of attending university classes, which was not great for my grades. People in Silicon Valley said, you're really good at this programming thing. Why don't you move down here? So in the early 1990s, I moved to Silicon Valley and I became a software engineer. And I found very quickly that what interested me were data and representation problems. There are a lot of issues that could be solved just by either having a good understanding of the kind of flow of data, what we'd call the 3 or 4 or 5 V's now, depending on who you ask, and the representation of it. So I worked at the Well on on text conferencing. Before you could just put up a PHP my board, and at Autodesk on CAD programs and a number of other places. That really got me into the kind of relationship between data and outcomes. And so for that, I have enjoyed that in my career. And I went back to school mid-career to finish my degree and said what I want to study is mathematics because this is the basis of data and of software engineering.
Right now you are in Japan, so how you landed up there?
Yeah, we've been in Japan for 18 years now. So we decided that we wanted to move out of the US. And then we looked around the world and said, what's a place that would be appealing for us? So, good public transportation, good education and health systems, kind of a nice quality of life, even if it's not as rich as Silicon Valley. We landed on Japan and said, this looks like a pretty nice place. And we've been here 18 years. So, we discovered that our assessment was good.
So, in US and Japan, right? So, what you saw the differences and why you have chosen Japan? You mentioned about the infrastructure, but why not US you wanted to stay in?
I think at the time the US was really, really expensive on healthcare. That's one thing. And also at the time that we moved, the US had started kind of bombing other countries just because people were angry. Like in particularly Iraq, everyone pretty much knew that Iraq was not behind the 9/11 attacks, but bombed them anyway. And my wife and I said, this is not where we want to raise our son. And so let's go somewhere else that's not involved in this. And Japan was not involved and hasn't been involved. So Japan is not kind of despite what some people might think, a really liberal country. It can be quite conservative, but it's not a militarily aggressive country.
That's true. That's true. And even I have seen the Japanese are really hardworking, and this is the impression what we have outside of the Japan. Is it?
I think most people across the world are really hardworking. I think to say Japanese people are really hardworking, you have to say, oh, if somebody works less than Japanese people, they must be lazy. I think what happens in Japan, though, is that Japanese people work a lot of hours. And so when I was interviewing for jobs, they would say, a really flexible, progressive company because you can work the 60 hours and we only tell you when you have to work 20 of those. You can choose when to work the other 40 each week. And it got to the point where the legislator had to pass laws saying that you can't make people work more than 100 hours of overtime per month unless the union says that's okay. So there's a Japanese word karoshi, which means death by overwork, and there are companies where have a lot of death by either health problems or self-inflicted. The kind of concept of how much and how hard people work, it hasn't led to a lot of productivity. And some companies now are saying, wait, you mean we could pay people less overtime but still get the same amount of work and they would have better lives? And so yeah, it's been a very slow process.
Data, like you are into consulting world. So what is the biggest mistake that the companies are right now making?
Gosh, I think probably the biggest mistake is jumping on too much technology too fast. So I've seen a lot of kind of public criticism of the modern data stack. And they say, oh, the modern data stack is, so complicated and expensive. Why should I have to have a database and a data warehouse and a BI tool and all of this? Like, why shouldn't it all just be one product? And I've been doing this for long enough that I remember when it wasn't that you had to have a database and all of that. It was that you had to go and buy a machine to host your database yourself. And a data warehouse didn't exist, but if you wanted something approaching one, you went to Sun and you said, hey, can we buy one of the Starfire machines for $1 million USD? And build a clean room so that it doesn't break down from sucking in hair or dust. So to me, the modern data stack was a case of it works really well, but most companies don't need it. Most companies, let's say below 500 people, depends on your industry. You can probably run things mostly okay with spreadsheets. Companies want to grow. They might want customer telemetry data or something, and there are platforms out there for that. So you might pick up a platform for that. But if you have, and I've seen companies as small as 10 saying, what size of Snowflake instance should we be running for our non-tech product? And it's too soon. If you don't have any analysts, you shouldn't be hiring data scientists and data engineers. So I think that companies rush too much into buying the machinery of data before they have built a culture of data and before they really understand how much they need.
Culture of data, they don't understand. So what is a data culture? Let's deep dive into that.
So the data culture can be a wide variety of things, but in general, it's the attitude of people about how data is perceived, how it is shared, how it is used. So I have talked with clients who think that, that data is all proprietary, that everything is really special, and that if your team can control the data, then they can gain political power. They don't want to share with other teams. They say, oh, other teams want to understand the data. Let us process it first and we'll provide insights. Or somehow that there will be competition for things like sales, or that it will not let them do what they want to do. That's kind of on the extreme selfish end of data culture. And on the other side of it is companies that are just completely open. They say, well, sure, we just put all of the data in our data warehouse and everybody can access everything. And then they are surprised when things happen, like somebody joins the company and downloads all of the company salaries. So you have to have a balance, and it has to be done with intention. So it's not a matter of where you go on the dial. It's a matter of the intention and putting in place policies and governance and things. And I think this comes with culture, because if you put in governance but the culture isn't there, then it's just extra machinery that everyone will ignore. The other thing is the way that questions about data are treated. And in kind of a weak culture, questions about data can be a source of kind of just go figure it out or go look it up, rather than an opportunity to say, if one person is asking, then there are probably several people who don't know. And that means that either our documentation is weak, or that maybe we should have a workshop during working hours about kind of data literacy, educate people on the difference between, let's say, nominal types and cardinal types, and scale or ratio types. Things that for those of us in the data world are really fundamental, and we learned long ago in school, or recently in school if we're new graduates. but we learn them and we learn them thoroughly. And we think, oh, how could you operate without them? But then we see lots of business people operating just fine without them, but it doesn't allow them to talk to data people. So one of the biggest complaints I hear about culture is every team has their own language, and culture in part is building a shared language so that the whole company can talk about it in the same kind of way.
You have given me a different definition. I mean, that's great. That everyone in the company should say, should feel, and should follow the same language. That is the culture.
Yeah, and it's not about everybody agreeing. It's about the language allowing the conversation to happen at all.
And even, okay, I will gonna give that instance in a bit, but I want to understand what are the challenges and use cases you have solved while you are doing the consultancy.
I think the primary use cases always start with finance and with sales, because finance, depending on the country you're in, you have, well, in most countries that I'm aware of, you have to report for taxes. And what that means that you have to know what your expenses are and you have to know what your income is. And that's data. And so your finance department is probably already collecting and generating data and recording it in a structured way. And then your sales team is probably also collecting and recording data and recording it. Maybe not in a structured way, maybe in Airtable or Salesforce or wherever else, but they're recording it someplace. Getting those two teams to talk to each other in the first place is a good start to a conversation. Because the finance can rightly say, if they're an American company, they say we follow GAAP rules. If they're not an American company, they usually say we follow IFRS. But they have a structured way that is dictated by their profession to report a certain subset of data. And then the salespeople are motivated to report their data in a way that maximizes commissions without being dishonest. So I'm not suggesting anyone's dishonest. It just maximizes commissions. And these two can be in conflict because some clients I have been at have had days of negative revenue, even if they're a revenue positive company, because they'll have a big return or a big order cancellation with a refund. And the accounting rules say they have to record it on that day. They don't reach back and record it on the day that they recorded income. They record it right then. And so if they have, $500,000 of income that day and $1 million of refund, so then that day shows up as losing $500,000. And it's not a great day. Nobody likes that. But as far as a data event, it's neutral. It means that there was $1 million or however much that was paid, that service was not received, that's been refunded, and you're the same off as if you had never gotten the money. But that's kind of a finance view, and it's like, I think that people can get very attached to what they feel should happen and not always pay attention to why it happens. And so when you're building reporting and things, you have to be prepared to explain these anomalous events and to understand that different teams might want it reported in different ways and make a choice of, are you only going to support one of them? If so, which one? And are you going to support multiple? And if so, how? And that's where things like a data dictionary come in.
You mentioned that, okay, we need to start with the finance team. We can start with the sales team. We can bridge the gaps between them to showcase that, okay, how much revenue we are generating, if we are in profits, if we are in losses. But one question that arises: when is the right time to start this report?
I think that it depends strongly on the business and on who you're asking when is the right time. So ultimately, the department heads should decide that they are going to start reporting on things. But one thing that I have observed, and I've talked about this at conferences and other things, is that you get the formation of shadow functions and shadow teams, where if you're not providing this kind of analysis and reporting, then somebody else in the team will do it. And they'll do it because they know it needs to be done, but they might not have the full set of tools to do it. And so for the data teams, for data leaders, the challenge is to pay attention and see what people are doing. And rather than trying to control what they're doing, to notice that this is an indication that capability is lacking or tools are lacking, and to either provide those or to explicitly kind of bless the efforts of the person who is doing it. And so the kind of data steward, data mesh model is you're blessing the efforts of these people by saying, right, each team is going to designate a steward. We're going to do this. Centralizing, you might instead provide training, or you might bring the person in, or you might provide an analyst who will work with them from centrally. But I think that this is the only reliable way I have found to tell that you need to do it is that you see people doing it. And this goes back to people working hard. I think most people in business have a good sense of what needs to be done. And this is part of mentoring, is that you look, when you're young, you look and see what the people around you are doing, and you get an idea of what's effective. And then as you go up in your career and you go up in age, you start having people looking up at you, and you're providing leadership.
One question, a follow-up question, that you mentioned that we should be, because someone else in the team, right, would be doing it. Maybe they are doing it in a wrong way, because you mentioned that they does not have the right tools and technologies. Maybe they might be using and doing in their own way, like Excels, or doing a lot of things over there, or maybe not getting the entire data. How? So that's the one area that as a data leader you should jump into. You should understand their problems, what they want to exactly, they want an outcome, and we can start taking those areas and start implementing in the form and creating the data culture from there. So this is the right way to do it in yours.
Yeah, in my perspective, money is not a worry. If you have venture capital funding, let's say that somebody gives you $500 million to build something, everything changes. So what I'm talking about are companies that have to be profitable, that can't just throw money at the problem. This kind of company, that whether you want to call it bootstrapping or just call it running a business, you'll have salespeople, I have found, who are very good at figuring out kind of heuristics for how much money they think they can make next month and estimating that. And if you can get them hooked into a data source so that they aren't kind of downloading a CSV of things from a month prior and trying to make estimates on that, if you can help them do it from, just recently, and then you can help them do automated and help it be part of the BI tooling. And then you can show this to production so they can know how much the salespeople expect to sell, so they can know how much to produce. And finance can do cash flow planning. Then all of a sudden it starts all coming together because you've paid attention to what some people were doing, and you're providing the tools and the culture and the integration of the data.
What is one red flag you notice that while you are doing the editing of any data infrastructure, that you notice that this is red flag and we need to take immediate action?
I'm not sure I would say there's one red flag. There are a few tools that it's very easy to spend an enormous amount of money for no value. And this is situational. So on AWS, for example, you have AWS Aurora, the relational database. And you can spend a lot of money that is not necessary to be spent if you have very high I/O usage, for example. You don't have a lot of data, but your IOPS is very high, input-output operations per second. Well, AWS offers an IOPS optimized version of this, which you have to pay a little bit more in base, but you get all the IOPS for free. One client saved $200,000 a year just by turning this on. So there's a whole discipline built up around this called FinOps, which is aimed at going through and finding this kind of switch and this kind of optimization. This kind of thing can very easily pay for itself. I think the red flag that comes up most often, I know I said there's probably not one red flag, but I think the thing that comes up most often that indicates the system is not operating as intended is when people are constantly downloading copies of data to do analysis in Excel. It doesn't have to be Excel, but it usually is.
It usually is, and it used for non-tech users, so that is why it is irreplaceable right now.
Yeah, and in Japan, the thing that's said kind of jokingly, but kind of seriously too, is that in Japan, a database administrator is somebody who knows how to save Excel in binary format, because databases are often replaced by Excel here in Japan. And it works. So usually they won't, take down a running database and put in Excel, but they just don't move beyond Excel because it continues to work for their use case. So I think it's an example of a tool that's that's really good, and people don't see the cost, the opportunity cost of not moving to something bigger. And so this is why I say it's kind of a red flag if people are always downloading to Excel, is because it means that they're getting their local problems solved, their local analyses solved, but it doesn't usually contribute to the whole ecosystem of analyses that a company could provide.
That means if there is a thing that should be reported back, and that can be added into the dashboard so that the entire team can have a view, and this should not happen at an individual level.
Yeah, they could put it back into the dashboard. If they always add an extra column to do some transformation, this can be put into a database view. There are a lot of different places that the things that are done in Excel can be put that benefit everybody. So if you have 10 people all downloading to Excel, all doing the same things, this is a lot of wasted effort and a lot of opportunity for mistakes to be entered. So I think the words that I kind of dread hearing if I know that I'm helping a company prepare for an audit in particular, we do this by manual entry, because manual entry is just like another way of saying we have a human type it and they're probably going to make mistakes. I know that I do. I was a professional editor for a number of years, and I was very happy to get 99.9% accuracy. And this sounds like a really high number, but for a book, I might make 50,000 suggestions, which meant that I was leaving 50 mistakes in. So manual entry as a source of mistakes is not a criticism of the person, it's an acknowledgement of kind of human capacity.
That's true. That's true. So you mentioned about the databases, Aurora databases, and how we can optimize that, right? According to you, which is the best database for a beginner company who wants to set up the data infrastructure? So which database they should be investing in?
I think that question doesn't have a good answer if we're looking at cloud databases. I think if you can do an on-premises MariaDB to get everyone familiar with it. I used to say MySQL, but MariaDB has all of the features of MySQL and it's probably got some goodness that MySQL doesn't. But there are a lot of other kind of local in-memory databases that I would recommend if a company is just setting up and wants to play with it. As far as other databases, it really depends on what the company is doing, because I think it's not even obvious that you'll want a relational database to start. There are some businesses where you might want a graph database, or you might want a document database or a key store. I think it's always worth checking the cloud providers and seeing if they have a free tier for things. For example, AWS has a free tier for DynamoDB. So if you're wanting to look at a wide column database, this is a good place to start, just making sure that you stay within the free tier. Google BigQuery, I don't only do AWS, I've also done quite a bit on GCP. Google BigQuery has a free tier as well. I think the first terabyte of data is free. And so you can do quite a lot of exploratory modeling and reading and things and seeing how you can kind of import CSVs, how you can link them together without having to pay anything. So I think
So, like, you are more in favor of on-premises than cloud if we are doing it. Because what's the difference between you can say, the pricing strategy of on-premises versus cloud?
On-premises, you're paying for your own hardware and you're having to maintain that, and so you have things like planned lifetimes. I don't know that it's worth going out and purchasing a server, but if you're starting up, you'll often have extra computers that maybe aren't very fast or that you can buy used, that you know that you have a fixed price that you are paying for it. And if everybody is local to it, then all you're paying for is electricity beyond that initial computer. With a lot of the cloud strategies, the idea is that they make it very easy and cheap to start. And then just at the time that it's become difficult to move away, you start having to pay. You might start Snowflake and it's really easy. You're not paying anything, and all of a sudden you're at the $30,000 a year tier. Or you set up Fivetran for data ingestion and you're on the free tier, and then somehow your millions of active rows tip over and now Fivetran wants $60,000 a year. So, it's a thing where if you are extremely disciplined, more disciplined than I am certainly, you can test the limits of these things to learn. And I think it's worth testing them out if you want to consider them for production usage. But your question was, if a team just wants to kind of learn and play, then what should they do? And for that, I think just finding something where you know the maximum amount you're going to pay, because you're going to pay for one computer and you're going to pay for electricity, and beyond that, everybody can play. I've had places where I said, okay, the rule is please don't crash production more than once a day, because we had built it to be resilient to this. Like, it wasn't really a problem if production went down for 10 or 15 minutes for, this was for kind of BI data warehousing applications, not for customer facing things. That's got much stricter. If you have a system that it's not catastrophic to bring it down, people become freer about experimentation. So if you have an on-prem database machine and somebody manages to crash it, then you say, right, what lessons can we learn from this? And you restart the machine and everything is fine. Whereas if you destroy your data warehouse on the cloud, you can use restore to a point in time, but it's not always easy to understand exactly what went wrong.
Yeah, that's true. And moreover, nowadays I got to know that companies earlier have moved from on-premises to cloud, and now they are moving from cloud to on-premises. So this is also the trend that is happening right now because of the cost.
Yes, yes.
It is getting expensive day by day. The pricing is increasing once in a while, right? And then it is very difficult to bear these costs. So then they think, okay, let's go to on-premises again.
Yeah, and I do think the clouds provide a valuable service, but there's a time when on-prem is probably cheaper, and then cloud becomes cheaper, and then there's a time when on-prem becomes cheaper again as you scale up. So you have a lot of the services that they're providing being open source software, which means that all they are doing is managing the infrastructure for you. And if you can pay a team to manage your infrastructure for less than you're paying your cloud provider, then despite how much the training emphasizes that you need 6 different availability zones to be highly available and such, you look at it and you go, well, maybe we don't need that much. Maybe this is what business insurance is for, is if our 2 different data centers both burn down at the same time, we'll just make an insurance claim rather than paying extra every day to have a third one. And the day you and I are speaking, there was just the kind of big cloud outage previous night for 3 hours. GCP wasn't accessible, and Cloudflare, and a lot of other things. So it's not the case that these services never go down.
I really liked your insights and experience that you are sharing. Really amazing. Yes. All right. I think this is all the questions I had, and your practical approach to data is amazing. I really liked it, and I hope that your perspective helped all the leaders to give more clarity what we should be using, how we should be using. And thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.